It's funny, isn't it, how a lifetime of dedication, of pouring your heart and soul into your family, can be shattered in a single, careless moment by someone who hasn't earned the right to even critique the dust on your mantelpiece. For 40 Thanksgivings, my home had been the heart of our family. The aroma of roasting turkey, the bubbling of my grandmother's secret green bean casserole recipe, the rich scent of pumpkin pies baked from scratch. These were the olfactory overtures to a symphony of love I conducted year after year. My name is Eleanor, and I suppose you could say I was the quintessential matriarch, the one who held everything together, especially after my dear Arthur passed away far too young, leaving me to raise our son, David, on my own. I never remarried. David was my world, my purpose. I worked 2 jobs for a while, scrimped and saved, all to ensure he had everything he needed, everything I could possibly give him. He grew into a good man, I thought, a successful architect. And then he met Amelia. Amelia, with her perfectly manicured nails, her designer handbags that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to, and her opinions, oh, her endless, unsolicited opinions on everything from my choice of curtains to the way I loaded the dishwasher. I'd always bitten my tongue for David's sake. A mother wants her child to be happy. And if Amelia was his happiness, then I would endure. I'd smile through her backhanded compliments and her thinly veiled criticisms, telling myself it was just her way, that she didn't mean any harm. But this past Thanksgiving, something snapped. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing my pride, reached their limit. The day had started like any other Thanksgiving. I was up before dawn, the turkey, a magnificent 20-pounder, already prepped and ready for its long, slow roast. The stuffing, a recipe passed down through 3 generations, was fragrant with sage and thyme. My special cranberry sauce, infused with orange zest and a hint of port wine, simmered gently on the stove. David and Amelia were due around 2, along with Amelia's parents, the Hendersons, who always looked vaguely uncomfortable in my cozy, slightly worn home, as if they were slumming it for the day. I'd spent weeks planning, shopping, cleaning. My hands, gnarled now with a touch of arthritis, ached from kneading dough for the Parker House rolls, but it was a good ache, the ache of love and labor. I wanted everything to be perfect, not for Amelia's approval. I'd long given up on that impossible quest, but for the memory of Thanksgivings past, for the joy it always brought me to see my family gathered, happy and well-fed. The table was set with my best china, the good silver polished to a gleam, a centerpiece of autumn leaves and gourds I'd arranged myself. I even wore the silk dress David had given me for my 70th birthday, a little tight now, but still elegant. I wanted to feel good, to project an air of festive cheer, even if a small, anxious knot had taken up residence in my stomach. Amelia had been particularly condescending lately, ever since David had received a promotion. It was as if her sense of superiority had inflated along with his new salary. I remember her looking at a cherished family photo on the mantelpiece a few weeks prior, a picture of me and Arthur, young and hopeful and murmuring, quaint, with a little smirk that made my blood simmer. But I'd let it go like so many other little barbs, for David, always for David. The guests arrived, a flurry of coats and polite greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson offered a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my entire grocery bill for the week, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. Amelia, resplendent in a cashmere sweater dress, surveyed the scene as if she were inspecting a hotel for a critical review. David gave me a quick, distracted hug, already absorbed in conversation with his father-in-law about some new golf course. I busied myself in the kitchen, bringing out appetizers, pouring drinks, trying to foster an atmosphere of warmth. The familiar dance of hosting. Finally, the moment arrived. The turkey, golden brown and magnificent, was presented. The side dishes, a vibrant tapestry of colors and textures, were laid out on the buffet. I watched, a quiet thrill in my heart, as everyone filled their plates. This was my moment, the culmination of all my efforts. Then, Amelia took her first bite of my signature cornbread stuffing. She paused, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arching. She poked at it with her fork, then looked up, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the table, silencing the nascent chatter. "Still making this rustic stuffing, are we?" "It's very traditional." She then turned to her mother. "You know, Mother, we went to that delightful little bistro last week. They had the most divine artisanal sourdough and wild mushroom stuffing. So much more refined, don't you think?" Mrs. Henderson tittered, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. David. David said nothing. He just stared at his plate, a faint flush creeping up his neck. My heart, which had been soaring moments before, plummeted. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, the condescension, the public dismissal of something I'd poured my love into. It was the still making this, as if I were some hopelessly out-of-touch relic, incapable of evolving or understanding her superior palate. The word rustic dripped with disdain. My hands, hidden beneath the tablecloth, began to tremble. Years of unspoken resentments, of swallowed indignities, surged to the surface. It wasn't just about stuffing, it was about respect. It was about my son, sitting there, mute, allowing his wife to humiliate his mother in her own home on a day that meant so much to me. The festive aroma of the food suddenly seemed cloying, the warmth in the room oppressive. The carefully constructed joy of the day shattered into a million pieces around my feet, and in that moment, something inside me, something I thought had been extinguished by years of quiet compliance, flared to life. It was a cold, hard flame of resolve. She wanted refined? She thought my efforts were merely rustic? Fine. I would give them something they wouldn't soon forget. The silence that followed Amelia's pronouncement was thick enough to carve. Mrs. Henderson quickly tried to fill it with some inanity about the weather, while Mr. Henderson suddenly found his mashed potatoes utterly fascinating. David studiously avoided my gaze, his fork clinking nervously against his plate. Only Amelia seemed oblivious, or perhaps pleased, with the ripple of discomfort she had caused, a smug little smile playing on her lips as she took a delicate sip of her expensive wine. I felt a wave of dizziness, the blood rushing to my head and then draining away, leaving me cold and strangely clear-headed. My appetite had vanished completely. The turkey, which I had so lovingly basted for hours, now looked like a grotesque monument to my own foolish sentimentality. The vibrant colors of the sweet potato casserole and the cranberry sauce seemed to mock me. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to demand how dare any of them treat me this way after everything. But I didn't. Years of practice in maintaining composure, of being the calm center in every storm took over, but this time it was different. It wasn't the composure of a martyr, it was the icy calm of someone who had just made a profound, unalterable decision. I looked at David, really looked at him, my son. The boy I had rocked to sleep, whose fevers I had nursed, whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the boy for whom I had sacrificed dreams and desires of my own without a second thought. And he couldn't even meet my eyes. He couldn't offer a single word of defense, not even a gentle, "Now, Amelia, Mom worked really hard on this." Nothing. Just that embarrassed flush and the clinking fork. That silence, his silence, was a betrayal far deeper than Amelia's careless cruelty. It told me everything I needed to know about my current place in his life, in their lives. I was an anachronism, a background character, tolerated but not truly valued, my efforts seen as quaint obligations rather than expressions of love. I managed a tight smile. "Well, Amelia," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though it felt like it was coming from a great distance. "We all have our preferences, don't we?" I picked at my own food, moving it around my plate, unable to swallow a single bite. The rest of the meal passed in a strained, stilted atmosphere. Amelia, emboldened by her earlier success, made a few more subtle digs. A comment about the charming, if a little dated, silverware, a sigh about how much easier it was to just cater these large events. Each word was a fresh pinprick in my already wounded heart. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to check on the pies. In the sanctuary of my kitchen, the familiar scent of cinnamon and nutmeg usually brought me comfort, but now it only amplified my sense of desolation. I leaned against the counter, my legs feeling weak. The reflection in the darkened window showed a tired, older woman, her festive dress looking almost like a costume. Was this it? Was this how my legacy of family and tradition was going to be remembered? As rustic and dated? As something to be politely endured or openly mocked? The thought of serving them my pies, my lovingly crafted pumpkin and apple crumble, suddenly felt unbearable. It would be like offering pearls to swine. No, that wasn't right. They weren't swine. They were just blind. Blind to the love, blind to the effort, blind to the person standing right in front of them. A cold fury, different from the initial shock, began to build. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a slow-burning, determined resolve. They wanted refined. They found my efforts lacking. So be it. I looked at my phone, lying on the counter. An idea, wild and audacious, began to form. It was impulsive, yes, but it felt utterly, profoundly right. It felt like the only way to reclaim a shred of my dignity, to make a statement that they couldn't ignore or belittle. My hands were still trembling, but now it was with a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. I had always been the giver, the nurturer, the one who smoothed things over. For the first time, in a very long time, perhaps ever, I was going to do something entirely for myself, to assert my own worth in a way that would be unmistakable. The pies could stay in the oven. They weren't going to get another piece of my heart on a plate today. The transition from hurt to action was surprisingly swift. Standing there in my kitchen, the sounds of their muted conversation drifting in from the dining room, a forced laugh from Mrs. Henderson, a low murmur from David. I felt a sudden, almost exhilarating clarity. The years of swallowing my feelings, of prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own, fell away. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I was no longer Eleanor, the long-suffering mother and mother-in-law. I was Eleanor, a woman who deserved respect, a woman who had value beyond her ability to produce a rustic Thanksgiving dinner. My first thought was practical. How could I do this? How could I make a statement that was both impactful and immediate? My eyes landed on my purse and then my phone. The idea that had flickered earlier now blazed into a concrete plan. I unlocked my phone, my fingers surprisingly nimble despite the tremor that still ran through them. I opened my web browser and typed in gourmet food delivery near me. Several upscale restaurants popped up, places Amelia often dropped, places that specialized in refined cuisine. One, in particular, L'Artiste Culinaire, was notorious for its prices and its tiny, artfully arranged portions. Perfect. I quickly scanned their online menu. Yes, they had a Thanksgiving special, a deconstructed turkey confit with truffle-infused gravy, parsnip puree, and a microgreen salad. It sounded exactly like something Amelia would adore, and precisely the opposite of my hearty, traditional fare. It would cost a fortune, probably more than I'd spent on the entire meal currently sitting half-eaten on my dining room table, but the thought of the expense barely registered. This wasn't about money, it was about a principle. I selected enough portions for 4 people, David, Amelia, and her parents. I wasn't going to eat it myself. I added it to my cart, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. As I entered my credit card details, I caught my reflection again in the microwave door. There was a spark in my eyes I hadn't seen in years, a glint of defiance. Before finalizing the order, a wave of doubt washed over me. Was this too extreme, too theatrical? What would David truly think? Would this destroy our relationship completely? Then I pictured his face at the table, his averted gaze, his silence, and Amelia's smug, dismissive smile. The doubt receded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner. It was about drawing a line in the sand. It was about saying, You will not treat me this way anymore. I confirmed the order, requesting immediate delivery. The estimated arrival time was 45 minutes. Enough time. Next, I pulled out my largest, most anonymous-looking serving platters from the back of the cupboard. Plain white ones, devoid of any sentimental value. I then went to my bedroom, a sense of calm purpose guiding my steps. I opened my closet and pulled out a small overnight bag I kept for occasional weekend trips to visit my sister. I began to pack, methodically, a change of clothes, toiletries, my medication, a good book. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As I packed, memories flickered through my mind. David as a little boy, his hand tucked trustingly in mine, Arthur, his laughter echoing in this very house. Countless family gatherings where this home had been filled with love and warmth. A pang of sadness hit me, a grief for what was being lost, for the illusion of a happy, cohesive family that was now irrevocably shattered. But beneath the sadness was a layer of steely resolve. Sometimes things had to be broken before they could be mended or before you realized they couldn't be mended and you needed to build something new. I found an old photograph of myself from my 20s, taken on a hiking trip with friends, before I met Arthur, before I became a wife and mother. I looked strong, independent, a little wild. I tucked it into my bag. A reminder. I then sat down at my small writing desk and took out a piece of my good stationery. I wrote a short, simple note. No accusations, no lengthy explanations. Just a statement of fact. My hand was remarkably steady as I wrote. When I was done, I folded it, put it in an envelope, and placed it on my pillow. That done, I took a deep breath. 45 minutes. The clock was ticking. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself in a play. The final act was about to begin. I returned to the kitchen just as my phone pinged with a notification. Your l'artiste culinaire order is out for delivery. A grim satisfaction settled over me. I began clearing the table, a task I usually performed with a sense of quiet contentment, the remnants of a successful meal testament to my efforts. Today, each plate felt heavy with unspoken words, each smeared dish a symbol of the disrespect I'd endured. Amelia and her mother had retired to the living room, their voices a low, complacent murmur. David and Mr. Henderson were still at the table, awkwardly pushing food around their plates, the conversation having dwindled to near silence. Don't worry about those, Mom, David said, finally looking at me, a flicker of something. Guilt, concern in his eyes. We can help with that later. It's no trouble, dear. I replied, my voice smooth, almost unnervingly calm. I'm just making some space. He looked uneasy, as if sensing a shift in the atmosphere, but he didn't press. He never pressed. That was the problem. I carried the half-eaten plates to the kitchen, scraping my beautiful, rustic food into the compost bin. It was a symbolic act, a discarding of the old role, the old expectations. There was no sadness in it now, only a sense of liberation. I heard the doorbell ring. My heart gave a little jump, but my expression remained impassive. I'll get that, I called out, before anyone else could move. I walked to the front door, smoothing down my dress, feeling a strange sense of power. The delivery driver, a young man in a crisp uniform, held out several insulated bags emblazoned with the L'Artiste Culinaire logo. Order for Eleanor? He asked. Yes, that's me, I said, signing the tablet he offered. I took the bags, the aroma of truffle oil and other exotic spices wafting out, so different from the homey scents of my own cooking. It smelled expensive. It smelled impersonal. It smelled perfect. I carried the bags into the dining room. David and Mr. Henderson looked up, surprised. Amelia and her mother drifted back in from the living room, curious about the interruption. What's all this, Eleanor? Amelia asked, her voice laced with that familiar tone of faint amusement, as if I were about to unveil some charmingly inept surprise. I placed the bags on the table, right next to the remnants of my own Thanksgiving feast. I began to unpack the containers, revealing the artfully arranged, minimalist portions from L'Artiste Culinaire. Small, elegant, undeniably refined. There was a stunned silence. David stared, his mouth slightly agape. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson exchanged bewildered glances. Amelia's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, horrified comprehension. "Well," I said, my voice clear and steady, resonating in the suddenly silent room. "Amelia, dear, since my cooking clearly wasn't up to your rather sophisticated standards, I thought perhaps this would be more to your liking. It's from L'Artiste Culinaire. I believe you've mentioned it?" Her face, usually so composed, so sure of itself, crumpled. A dark flush spread from her neck up to her cheeks. She looked from the fancy takeout containers to me, speechless for perhaps the first time since I'd known her. I turned to my son. "And David?" I continued, my gaze unwavering. "Since you evidently agree with your wife's assessment of my culinary skills, or at least, you didn't see fit to disagree, I'm sure you'll enjoy this as well. It's certainly less rustic." David's face was a mask of shock and dawning shame. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, his eyes pleading with me. But I wasn't finished. I took a small, steadying breath. "Please, everyone, help yourselves. Don't let it get cold." Then, I turned and walked towards the hallway. I picked up the small overnight bag I had placed near the coat rack earlier. I, however, won't be joining you. I find I've lost my appetite. I slung the bag over my shoulder. I've decided to spend the rest of the holiday elsewhere. Somewhere my efforts, rustic as they may be, are appreciated. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and stunned. I could feel their eyes on my back as I walked to the front door. For a fleeting second, I wondered if David would call out, would stop me, would say something, anything. He didn't. I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp November air, and pulled it shut behind me, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the sudden stillness of my old life. The aroma of their expensive, refined dinner was already fading, replaced by the clean, cold scent of impending winter, and for the first time all day I felt like I could breathe again. The drive to my sister Carol's house was a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, yet I felt strangely disembodied, as if I were floating. The streetlights streaked past, illuminating the falling leaves that danced across the road. Little reminders of the autumn celebration I had just irrevocably altered. Carol lived about an hour away in a quiet suburban town, and I'd called her from the car, my voice trembling slightly as I recounted the bare bones of what had happened. "Good for you, Ellie," she'd exclaimed, her voice a warm balm to my frayed nerves. "You get yourself over here right now. The kettle's on, and I've got that lemon drizzle cake you like." The thought of Carol's sensible presence and a cup of hot tea was like a beacon in the emotional storm I was navigating. As I drove, snippets of the scene in the dining room replayed in my mind. Amelia's face, a kaleidoscope of shock, anger, and humiliation. David's stunned silence, his eyes wide with a pain that I knew was part my doing, but also part his own for failing to stand up for me, for us, for the very mother who had raised him. There was a grim satisfaction in the memory of Amelia's composure finally cracking, but it was overshadowed by a deep, aching sadness for my son. Had I been too harsh? Had I broken something that could never be repaired? The years of unspoken resentments, the constant, subtle erosion of my worth in their eyes, had culminated in this one dramatic act. It wasn't just about a ruined Thanksgiving dinner. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about drawing a boundary that had been crossed too many times. I thought of the note I'd left on my pillow. "I need some time to myself. I trust you'll enjoy the dinner I've arranged. Perhaps it will give you all something to think about regarding appreciation and respect. Eleanor." Simple, direct, and I hoped, effective. When I finally pulled into Carol's driveway, her porch light was a welcoming glow in the darkness. She was waiting at the door, her arms open, and I practically fell into her embrace. "Oh, Ellie," she murmured, holding me tight. "You brave, silly woman! Come in, come in." Inside, her cozy living room, with its comfortable, slightly mismatched furniture and shelves overflowing with books, felt like a true sanctuary. The scent of lemon drizzle cake and freshly brewed tea enveloped me, a world away from the truffle-scented tension I'd left behind. Carol, ever practical, sat me down on the sofa, wrapped a knitted afghan around my shoulders, and pressed a steaming mug of tea into my hands. "Now," she said, settling beside me. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. And don't leave out a single delicious detail of Amelia's face." Recounting the story to Carol, allowing myself to voice all the hurt and anger I'd suppressed for so long was cathartic. She listened patiently, nodding, occasionally interjecting with an indignant, "The nerve!" or a supportive, "You did the right thing, Ellie." She'd never been Amelia's biggest fan, finding her as pretentious and cold as I secretly did. "That boy of yours?" Carol said, shaking her head when I described David's passivity. "He needs to find his backbone. A wife is one thing, but your mother is your mother. He let her walk all over you for years." Her words, blunt but true, resonated deeply. Perhaps David wasn't a bad person, but he had undeniably been a weak one where Amelia's behavior towards me was concerned. He had chosen the path of least resistance, and I had been the casualty. My phone, which I'd placed on the coffee table, buzzed. David's name flashed on the screen. I looked at it, then at Carol. She raised an eyebrow. "Going to answer it?" I hesitated. Part of me, the mother part, yearned to talk to him, to hear his voice, to perhaps start mending the rift. But another, stronger part, the part that had found her voice today, knew it was too soon. I needed space. He needed to sit with the consequences of his inaction. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again a few minutes later, another call from David, and then a text message, and another. I ignored them all. He can stew in that expensive takeout for a while, Carol said with a satisfied nod. "Let them figure out what it feels like when the chief cook and bottle washer walks off the job." We sat talking late into the night, dissecting years of family dynamics, laughing a little, crying a little. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't feel alone. I had an ally, someone who saw me, understood me, and validated my feelings. As I finally drifted off to sleep in Carol's comfortable guest room, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but I had taken the first, most difficult step. I had chosen myself. The next morning, I woke to the unfamiliar sounds of Carol's house, the chirping of sparrows outside the window instead of the city traffic I was used to, the distant clatter of her making breakfast. A fragile sense of peace settled over me, the kind that comes after a violent storm has passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. My phone showed a string of missed calls and increasingly frantic texts from David. "Mom, please call me. Mom, where are you? Are you okay? Mom, this isn't funny. Amelia is very upset." That last one brought a wry smile to my lips. Upset, was she? Good. Perhaps being upset would be a novel experience for her, a break from her usual serene condescension. Carol and I had a leisurely breakfast, filled with easy conversation and more of her practical wisdom. "So, what's your next move, Ellie?" she asked, buttering a piece of toast. "You can't stay here forever, much as I'd love to have you." I sighed. "I know. Honestly, Carol, I haven't thought that far ahead. Leaving yesterday was impulsive. Necessary, but impulsive. I confessed that the thought of returning to my house, to the scene of the Thanksgiving debacle, filled me with dread. It no longer felt like my sanctuary, but a place tainted by disrespect and disappointment. "Maybe it's time for a bigger change," Carol mused, looking at me thoughtfully. "You've been rattling around in that big house by yourself for years, mostly keeping it up for David and his expectations of holiday gatherings. Is it really where you want to be?" Her words struck a chord. I had often felt like a custodian of the family home rather than its joyful inhabitant, especially in recent years. The upkeep was becoming a burden, and the memories, once cherished, were now tinged with the bitterness of yesterday's events. David called again while we were clearing the breakfast dishes. This time, I decided to answer, but on my terms. "Hello, David," I said, my voice calm and even. "Mom! Oh, thank God, where are you? Are you all right? We were so worried." His voice was a torrent of relief and anxiety. "I'm perfectly fine, David. I'm at Carol's." "Carol's? Why didn't you tell us? Mom, what you did yesterday, it was awful. Amelia is devastated." Her parents were horrified. "Were they?" I asked, a hint of steel in my tone. "Perhaps they were horrified by Amelia's rudeness to her hostess, or by your complete failure to say a word in my defense when your wife insulted me in my own home, at my own table." There was a silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Mom, she didn't mean it like that. You know how Amelia can be. She just speaks her mind." "Does she?" I replied. "Well, yesterday, for the first time, I decided to speak mine, and to act on it. Tell me, David, how was the l'artiste culinaire? Was it refined enough for everyone's tastes?" He stammered, "Mom, that's not the point. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed Amelia." "Embarrassed her?" I felt a surge of the previous day's anger, but I kept my voice level. "She publicly ridiculed my cooking, something I have poured my love and effort into for this family for decades. She has consistently treated me with disrespect, and you, David, have consistently allowed it. What I did yesterday was a direct consequence of that. Perhaps Amelia needed to be embarrassed to understand that her words have consequences. And perhaps you needed a reminder that your mother is not a doormat." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "What do you want, Mom?" "What do I want?" I echoed. "I want respect, David. I want to be treated like a valued member of this family, not an unpaid caterer or a quaint old relic. I want my son to stand up for me, and right now what I want most is some space. I need time to think, to decide what I want my life to look like going forward, because it's very clear that the old ways are no longer working for me." "So, you're not coming home?" he asked, a note of desperation creeping in. "Not right now, no," I said gently but firmly. "I'll be in touch when I'm ready. In the meantime, David, I suggest you and Amelia have a very serious conversation about how you treat people, especially the people who have loved and supported you your entire life." I ended the call feeling a mixture of sadness and empowerment. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had with my son, but it was also the most honest. Carol gave me a supportive squeeze on the shoulder. "That took guts, Ellie. You stood your ground." The rest of the day was quiet. I helped Carol in her garden, the physical work a welcome distraction. The texts from David slowed, then stopped. I imagined the uncomfortable conversations happening in his house, the recriminations, the dawning realization, I hoped, that things had fundamentally changed. I felt a sense of relief, yes, but also a profound melancholy. The image of the happy family I had always strived for had been shattered, and I knew that even if we found a new way forward, it would never be the same. But perhaps, I thought, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Perhaps different could be better, more honest, more real. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for Eleanor to discover who she was when she wasn't just Mom. The days turned into a week. I stayed with Carol, relishing the peace and the absence of expectation. We fell into a comfortable routine: morning walks, leisurely afternoons spent reading or gardening, quiet evenings watching old movies. It was a period of healing, of reflection. I deliberately kept my contact with David to a minimum, responding to his occasional texts with brief, polite messages, letting him know I was safe but not ready to re-engage. He sounded lost and contrite in his messages, mentioning that Amelia was struggling to understand and that Thanksgiving had been a disaster. I felt a pang of maternal guilt, but I pushed it aside. They needed to navigate this fallout themselves. It was during this time, with Carol's encouragement, that I began to seriously consider my future. The idea of selling my house, once a fleeting thought, started to take root. It was too big for me, filled with too many ghosts and too many painful recent memories. It was also a symbol of the life I was trying to leave behind, a life where my identity was solely wrapped up in being a mother and a homemaker for a family that had, in many ways, ceased to appreciate it. I contacted a realtor, a kind, efficient woman named Susan, recommended by Carol. We met at a coffee shop, and I explained my situation, omitting the more dramatic details of Thanksgiving but making it clear I was looking for a fresh start. Susan was understanding and professional. She suggested we list the house after the holidays in the new year. The thought of putting my home on the market was daunting but also liberating. It felt like taking control, making a proactive decision about my own future. One afternoon, while browsing online property listings, I stumbled upon a listing for a small cottage in a coastal town about 2 hours south of the city. It was charming, with a small garden and a view of the ocean from the upstairs bedroom. It was much smaller than my current house, but it felt right. It felt like a place where Eleanor could be Eleanor, not just David's mother or Amelia's rustic mother-in-law. A little over a week after Thanksgiving, David called again. This time, his tone was different, less frantic, more subdued, almost hesitant. "Mom," he began. "Can we talk? Really talk? I... I need to understand, and I need to apologize." I agreed to meet him, but on neutral ground. We chose a quiet park midway between Carol's house and the city. When I saw him waiting on a park bench, he looked tired, older than his years. There were shadows under his eyes. My heart ached for him, but I maintained a composed demeanor. He started hesitantly, stumbling over his words at first. "Mom, I am so sorry," he said, finally, looking me in the eye. "For Thanksgiving, for everything. For not standing up for you, for letting Amelia, for not seeing how much her words and my silence were hurting you." He spoke for a long time. He told me that after I left, the atmosphere had been awful. Amelia had initially been furious, defensive, trying to paint me as unreasonable and overly sensitive. Her parents had been embarrassed and had left quickly. But left alone with the expensive, uneaten takeout and the gaping hole my absence had created, he and Amelia had had the biggest fight of their marriage. "She didn't get it at first, Mom," David said, his voice raw. "She genuinely thought her observations were just honest. It took days and some very blunt conversations for her to even begin to see how disrespectful and cruel she's been. Not just on Thanksgiving, but for a long time." He confessed that he had often taken the path of least resistance, avoiding conflict with Amelia by not challenging her when she made disparaging remarks about me or my home. He admitted he'd taken me for granted, always assuming I'd be there, always tolerant, always forgiving. "I see now," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I failed you. As a son, I failed you. I was weak and I was selfish and I allowed my wife to disrespect the most important woman in my life." His apology felt genuine, born of painful reflection. It wasn't just words, it was an acknowledgement of his own failings, of the dynamic he had allowed to fester. "And Amelia?" I asked quietly. She wants to apologize too," David said. "She wrote you a letter. She's not good with this kind of thing, but she's trying. She finally understands that she nearly destroyed our family." He looked down at his hands. "She's also realized that if she wants to be part of my life, she has to respect the people I love. Starting with you." It was a start. A painful, difficult start, but a start nonetheless. I listened, absorbing his words, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. The anger I had carried for so long began to soften, replaced by a weary sadness but also a flicker of hope. Perhaps something could be salvaged after all, but it would be on new terms, my terms. The letter from Amelia arrived a few days later, forwarded by Carol. It was handwritten on elegant, cream-colored stationery, her usually confident script looking a little shaky. I read it sitting in Carol's sunny breakfast nook, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. It wasn't a perfect apology. There were still traces of defensiveness, a hint of, "I didn't realize I was being perceived that way." But beneath it, I could sense a genuine, if awkward, attempt at contrition. She admitted her words about my stuffing had been thoughtless and unkind. She acknowledged that she had often judged my home and my ways unfairly, attributing it to different standards but conceding that her delivery had been insensitive. The most telling part was her admission that David had made it clear her behavior was unacceptable and that their really af too. Marriage was at stake if she didn't make a sincere effort to change and to show me genuine respect. It seemed my son had finally found his backbone. She ended by saying she hoped, in time, I might be able to forgive her, and that she would understand if I needed space. I folded the letter slowly. It wasn't the groveling apology some small vindictive part of me might have wished for, but it was more than I had expected from Amelia. It was a crack in her armor of self-importance. Whether it would lead to lasting change remained to be seen, but it was a gesture. I decided not to reply immediately. Words were easy, actions would speak louder. In the meantime, I proceeded with my own plans. Susan, the realtor, listed my house. The photographer took beautiful, bright pictures, making it look appealing and spacious. The for sale sign went up in the front yard, a tangible symbol of my new direction. When I told David about my decision to sell, he was initially shocked, then saddened. "But Mom, that's our home, all our memories are there." "They are, David," I said gently. "And I'll always cherish those memories. But it's too big for me now, and honestly, after everything that's happened, I need a fresh start. A place that's truly mine, without the weight of past expectations." He didn't argue, to his credit. He seemed to understand, or at least accept, my need for change. He even offered to help me sort through things and pack, an offer I gratefully accepted. The process of decluttering and packing up a lifetime of memories was both poignant and liberating. Each object held a story: baby shoes, school reports, old photographs, gifts from Arthur. There were moments of tears, of laughter, of quiet reflection. David came over several weekends to help, and those days were a tentative rebuilding of our bond. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years, not just about superficial things, but about our feelings, our disappointments, our hopes for the future. He was more considerate, more attentive than he had been in a long time. He spoke of Amelia's efforts to be more mindful, of their ongoing conversations about respect and empathy. He admitted it was a work in progress. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, he found an old, slightly battered recipe box. It was my mother's, filled with her handwritten recipes, including the one for the infamous cornbread stuffing. He picked it up, a nostalgic smile on his face. "Remember how Grandma used to let me lick the spoon when she made this?" he asked. I nodded, a lump in my throat. "She always said it was the love that made it taste so good." He looked at me, his eyes earnest. "Mom, your cooking was always made with love. I was a fool not to see, not to appreciate, not to defend that. I hope someday you'll feel like cooking for us again, but only if and when you want to. No pressure. Ever." That, more than any apology, touched me deeply. It was an acknowledgement of my feelings, an understanding of my need for autonomy. The house sold surprisingly quickly, to a young family with small children who fell in love with its charm and its big backyard. There was a bittersweet pang as I signed the closing papers, but it was overshadowed by a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. I found a lovely rental in the coastal town I'd seen online, a temporary place while I searched for my own little cottage. It was bright and airy, with a small balcony overlooking the ocean. The day I moved, Carol helped me, and even David took the day off work to drive the U-Haul. Amelia did not come, a decision David said was hers, as she felt I still needed space from her, which I appreciated. As we unpacked the last box in my new, sun-filled living room, David gave me a hug. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said quietly. This took a lot of courage. Coming from him, it meant the world. My new life began, quietly at first. I explored my new town, discovered little cafes and bookshops, walked along the beach every morning, breathing in the fresh, salty air. I started painting again, a hobby I'd neglected for decades. I even, tentatively, started cooking for pleasure again. Simple meals for myself, experimenting with new recipes, enjoying the process without the pressure of performance or expectation. Months passed. My little rental by the sea began to feel like home. I made a few friends, a retired librarian who ran a book club, a cheerful artist who owned a small gallery downtown. Life settled into a gentle rhythm, dictated by my own desires and needs, not by the demands or expectations of others. I found a charming little cottage, the one I had dreamed of, with a rambling rose garden and a view of the sea from the kitchen window. The purchase was a celebration, a tangible symbol of my independence and my new beginning. David and I established a new kind of relationship. He called regularly, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to connect. He visited a few times, sometimes alone, sometimes with Amelia. Her visits were different. She was more reserved, more observant, more polite. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a cautious respect. She asked questions about my painting, complimented my garden, even tentatively asked for the recipe for my lemon drizzle cake, Carol's recipe, which I gladly shared. There was no talk of rustic or refined. She even, on one occasion, helped me weed the garden, her perfectly manicured nails getting smudged with dirt, a sight I never thought I'd see. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but it was progress. I knew our relationship would always be a work in progress, but there was a willingness now on both sides to try. The holidays approached again. David called, a little anxiously. "Mom," he said, "we were wondering, what are your plans for Thanksgiving?" I smiled. "Actually, David," I said, "I was thinking of having a very quiet Thanksgiving here, just me and a good book. But you and Amelia are welcome to come down for a visit that weekend, if you like. We could go for a walk on the beach, maybe get some really good takeout seafood." He laughed, a genuine, relieved laugh. "That sounds perfect, Mom." Absolutely perfect. And it was. They came, and it was relaxed and easy. We ate fish and chips from a paper wrapper sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean, the wind whipping our hair. Amelia actually seemed to enjoy the simplicity of it. There were no grand pronouncements, no critiques, just pleasant conversation and shared laughter. That evening, as they were leaving, Amelia turned to me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice quiet. "Thank you for everything. I'm still learning, but I'm trying." I nodded. "I know you are, dear. And so am I. Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons. That disastrous Thanksgiving, the one where my world felt like it was crumbling, turned out to be the catalyst for the most profound and positive changes in my life. It forced me to confront a reality I had been avoiding, to find a strength I didn't know I possessed, and to reclaim a sense of self I had long ago submerged in the service of others. Selling the family home was a liberation. My little cottage by the sea is my sanctuary, filled with light, art, and the scent of the ocean. My cooking is now purely for joy, for myself, for my new friends, and sometimes, when I feel like it, for David and Amelia. They know never to critique it, and Amelia even praises my wonderfully flavorful dishes with what seems like genuine appreciation. The word rustic has been permanently banished from her vocabulary, at least in my presence. My relationship with David is stronger, more honest than it has been in years. He sees me now not just as his mother, the ever-reliable provider, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own life, her own needs, her own boundaries. And Amelia? Well, Amelia is a work in progress. She's learned a hard lesson about respect and consequences. Our interactions are still carefully navigated, but there's a tentative warmth there, a shared understanding born from a crisis that nearly tore us all apart. She sends me photos of her attempts at baking, sometimes even asking for my advice, which I give gently. I don't host big, elaborate family dinners anymore. The pressure is gone. If they visit, we keep it simple. Sometimes I cook, sometimes we go out, sometimes we order pizza. The focus is no longer on the performance of a perfect meal, but on genuine connection. I often think back to that moment in my kitchen, the phone in my hand, the audacious plan forming. It was a turning point, a moment where I chose dignity over despair. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about asserting my worth, about saying enough. And in doing so, I didn't just teach my family a lesson, I taught myself one too. That it's never too late to rewrite your own story, to choose your own happiness, to find your own peace, even if it means leaving a perfectly good, albeit rustic, Thanksgiving dinner to get cold on the table. And as I sit here now in my cozy kitchen, sipping tea and looking out at the waves, I know I made the right choice. I am Eleanor, and I am finally truly content.